6 months after my second son died, my house burned down in a violent midnight storm. With 3 frightened grandchildren and a black garbage bag of borrowed blankets, I drove to my daughter's apartment. She looked at the children, then quietly closed the door. My eldest son barely glanced at us and said, "Take them to a shelter, Dad. I'm expecting important guests." I walked back to my old truck without another word and made one phone call. Nothing changed overnight. But eventually, the people who shut their doors on us discovered they had lost far more than they imagined. I am so grateful you chose to stay. Before this story unfolds, tell me in the comments where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I want to know. Please note some elements of this story are fictional, included for storytelling and educational value. Names and settings are not drawn from specific individuals, but the message waiting for you is one worth hearing. The night, everything burned. The sound that woke me was not a sound I had ever heard before, and I have been alive for 70 years. It was Theo coughing. Not the soft, half-asleep cough of a 4-year-old fighting a cold. This was something desperate and raw, the sound of small lungs trying to pull air from a room where the air had already been replaced by something else entirely. I opened my eyes, and the darkness was wrong. There was a glow under the bedroom door that did not belong there, orange and shifting. And the smell hit me a half-second later like a closed fist. Smoke. Thick structural smoke. The kind that gets into your chest and stays. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, the one habit my son Danny had drilled into me for years. Always keep it charged, and always keep it close, Walter. I had laughed at him every time he said it. I was not laughing now. I dialed 911 as I moved down the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall to feel for heat. 911, what is your emergency? Fire, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. My house is on fire. Turley District, North Tulsa. I have 3 children inside. Sir, is everyone able to evacuate? I'm getting them right now. I pushed open Sawyer's door first. My oldest grandchild, 8 years old, was already sitting up in bed with his eyes wide open, his face lit orange by the glow coming through the window. Sawyer Cruz was not a boy who panicked. Even at 8, he had that quality, the ability to go very still when everything around him was falling apart. He had learned it the hard way over the past 6 months, watching his grandfather do the same thing. Grandpa, he said. Just my name. That was enough. We're going, now, take your sister. Ren was 6, and unlike her brother, she was already crying, not from fear, but from the smoke stinging her eyes, tears running down her face as she reached for Sawyer's hand. He took it without being asked. His small jaw set tight, the way it always got, when he was determined not to fall apart. Theo was in my arms before he finished coughing. 4 years old, still small enough that I could carry him against my chest with one arm, his face buried in my shoulder, his whole body shaking with each ragged breath. His skin felt warm, too warm. The smoke had gotten to him first. We made it out the back door and into the yard, just as I heard the first crack from the roof, a sound like a gunshot that made all 3 children flinch against me. I pulled them further from the house across the wet grass into the middle of the yard where the air was open and cold and clean. The Tulsa Fire Department arrived 11 minutes later. I know the exact number because I counted every one of them standing in my yard in a burned sleep shirt, with 3 children pressed against my legs, and the house I had lived in for 40 years collapsing behind me. The firefighters were efficient and professional, and completely unable to save anything. The structure was gone before they finished unrolling the hose. Sir? One of the younger firefighters, maybe 25, approached me with a silver emergency blanket. Is everyone accounted for? Anyone else inside? One else. Just us, I said. Just the 4 of us. He wrapped the blanket around Theo and looked at me with that particular expression that young men have when they are witnessing something they do not yet know how to categorize. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight, sir?" I opened my mouth and then closed it again. That was when Virgil Monroe came across the yard. Virgil was 72 years old, a retired Army veteran who had lived next door to me for 19 years. He was the kind of man who kept his porch light on all night, and his opinions mostly to himself. He came across the grass in a rain slicker that was 2 sizes too large, moving faster than a man his age had any business moving, and he was carrying a black garbage bag in both arms. "Walter." His voice was rough from sleep and urgency. I grabbed what I could. Some blankets, the kids' clothes from the dryer on my end, Grace's old coats. Grace was his wife, gone 4 years now. "It's not much, but it'll keep them warm." He pushed the bag into my hands, and I held it, and felt the weight of it, this simple, practical gift from a man who had nothing to gain from giving it. "Virgil," I started. "Don't," he said. "Just take care of those kids." I looked down at the bag in my hands, then back at my house, which was no longer a house. The walls were going now one by one, folding inward like something exhausted. 40 years of living. The kitchen where Donovan had eaten breakfast every morning before school. The back room where Sawyer had taken his first steps. All of it going, all of it gone. 6 months ago, I had buried my son Donovan, my second boy, killed in a construction accident at a work site on the east side of Tulsa. He was 38 years old, and he left behind 3 children and a wife named Renata, who had cried for exactly 3 days before she packed 2 suitcases, cleared out the joint bank account, took the insurance payout from Donovan's workplace policy, and walked out the door with a man none of us had ever met. She left a note on the kitchen counter. 6 words. "I can't do this anymore. Sorry." I had driven over that same morning and found Sawyer sitting at the kitchen table feeding Theo cereal, Ren drawing on the back of a grocery receipt, all 3 of them waiting for someone to tell them what came next. That someone turned out to be me. 6 months of school pickups and pediatric appointments and nightmares at 2 in the morning, and dinners I learned to cook from YouTube videos because I had never needed to learn before. 6 months of being the only thing standing between 3 children and a world that had taken their father and would not be giving him back. And now the house was gone too. The fire chief came to tell me they had done everything they could. I thanked him. He gave me a card for the Red Cross emergency line and told me there was a shelter downtown, but with the storm system moving through the county, most of the facilities were already at capacity. Roads in the low-lying areas were flooding. The nearest overflow center was over an hour away, and the highway was partially closed. I looked at the black garbage bag in my hands. I looked at Theo asleep against my shoulder, his breathing finally evening out in the cold air. I looked at Sawyer, who was watching the last wall of our house fall, with an expression on his face that no 8-year-old should ever have to wear. My chest felt like something had been removed from it. I loaded all 3 kids into my old Chevy, buckled them in, turned the heat to the highest it would go. The engine coughed twice before catching. I set the black garbage bag on the passenger seat. There was only one direction left to go. The heater groaned in a low, rattling hum as I drove through Tulsa's flooded streets. Rain hammered the windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up, smearing the world outside into a blur of orange streetlights and dark water. Theo had stopped coughing somewhere around the 3rd intersection, and I glanced in the rearview mirror to find all 3 of them curled together across the back seat, Sawyer's arm wrapped around Ren's shoulder. Theo's small head pressed flat against his brother's ribs. They looked like a pile of exhausted puppies. My chest did something complicated at the sight of them, something that wasn't quite love and wasn't quite grief, but lived somewhere between the two. I hadn't let myself cry yet. There wasn't room for it. The black garbage bag Virgil had shoved into my hands sat on the passenger seat sides, bulging with folded blankets and a child's winter coat he must have grabbed from his own hall closet. The man hadn't asked a single question. He'd just pressed that bag into my arms and said, "Get those kids somewhere warm, Walter. Don't worry about anything else tonight. 72 years old and still the most decent man I'd ever known. I turned onto Riverside Drive at 11:43 at night. Preston's house rose up behind a wrought iron gate, 3 stories of cream-colored brick, every window dark, except for the amber glow of a foyer light. I'd helped him move into this house 4 years ago. I'd carried boxes up those porch steps myself, my back screaming the whole time because that's what fathers do. I'd never once imagined I'd be pulling into the driveway with 3 smoke-smelling grandchildren and nothing but a bag of borrowed blankets. I parked, told the kids to stay put, and walked to the gate's call box. The rain soaked through my shirt in seconds. I pressed the button. Nothing. I pressed it again, holding it down for a long 3 count. A crackle of static, then Preston's voice rough with sleep and unmistakably irritated. "Who is it?" "It's your father, Preston." I kept my voice steady. I was proud of that. "The house burned down tonight. I have the kids with me. I need a place for us to stay." A pause that lasted too long. "Dad." His tone shifted not toward warmth, but toward something careful and managed the voice he used in meetings. "It's almost midnight." "I know what time it is," I said. "I know exactly what time it is because I've been driving for 40 minutes with 3 children who just watched their home burn to the ground. We don't—" He stopped himself, tried again. "Diane's parents are visiting. We don't have a spare room right now." Diane. His wife. I'd sent her a birthday card every year for 9 years without missing once. "Preston." My voice cracked on the second syllable, just a fraction, just enough that I hated myself for it. "I'm not asking for a vacation. I'm asking for one night. A couch. A corner of your floor. Something. I can't just, Dad, I can't deal with this right now. Call a shelter. Red Cross sets those up after fires. There are systems for this." He said it the way someone reads from a policy document. Flat. Efficient. Done. I stood there in the rain and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not numb, not cold. Quiet in the way a room goes quiet after someone says something that cannot be taken back. "You're telling me no," I said. "I'm telling you there are better options." "Preston." I cut him off, and my voice came out harder than I intended, harder than I'd heard it in years. "Your brother is dead. His children are in my car right now, and they smell like smoke, and the youngest one has been coughing for an hour. I am 70 years old, and I am standing in the rain asking you to open your door." The intercom hissed. Then, "I'll send you some money in the morning. Get a motel room tonight, Dad." I'm serious, the Red Cross is really equipped for. I took my finger off the button. I stood there for one more moment, rain running down the back of my neck, staring at that amber foyer light behind 3 stories of cream-colored brick. Somewhere on the other side of that gate, my son was already walking back to his bedroom, already convincing himself he'd done the right thing, already sleeping. I walked back to the car. Sawyer was awake. He'd shifted to the window and watched me come back through the rain, and when I opened the driver's door and settled into the seat, he didn't ask what happened. He was 8 years old, and he'd already learned how to read the answer off a person's face. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "where are we going?" I reached back and squeezed his knee, once firm and deliberate, the way my own father used to do when words weren't ready yet. "Somewhere warm," I told him. I put the car in reverse. There was one more number I could call tonight. One more door I could try. Preston's younger sister had always been softer, or at least that's what I'd believed. That's what I needed to keep believing for another 20 minutes while I drove across town through the rain. But the look on Preston's face, the voice, really that careful, managed voice, kept replaying in my head. And something in my stomach told me the next door might feel exactly the same. Cecily had always been the one who cried at commercials. I used to tease her about it when she was a teenager. She'd be folded up on the living room couch with a throw pillow pressed to her face, sniffling over some advertisement about a dog finding its way home. And I'd walk past and say, "You're going to flood the whole house, Cece." She'd throw the pillow at me and laugh, and the whole thing would be over in 30 seconds. That was my daughter. The one who felt things so openly she couldn't hide them if she tried. I held on to that memory the entire drive to her apartment building on South Peoria Avenue. I needed it. It was the only thing keeping my foot on the gas. The building had a security buzzer at the front entrance, a steel panel with a row of numbered buttons. I found her unit 214 and pressed it at 12:31 in the morning. Rain was still falling lighter now, but steady, and Theo had woken up again in the car. Wren had her arm around him, whispering something soft and repetitive that I couldn't quite hear through the window. I'd left them in the car with the heat running and the doors locked. I told Sawyer to honk once if anything felt wrong. He'd nodded like a soldier. The buzzer clicked. "Hello." Cecily's voice was thick with sleep, but I'd have known it anywhere. "Cecily, it's Dad." I pressed closer to the speaker panel. "I'm sorry for the hour. The house burned down tonight. I have Sawyer, Wren, and Theo with me. We need somewhere to stay." A long breath. Then, "Oh my God, Dad, are you serious?" I wouldn't call it midnight if I weren't. Okay, come up. Second floor, turn left." The door buzzed open. My shoulders dropped 2 full inches. The elevator was slow and smelled like carpet cleaner. I wrote it up, telling myself it was going to be fine. She'd already said, "Come up." She'd already buzzed me in. It was going to be fine. The hallway on the second floor was narrow and lit with yellow overhead lights that made everything look faintly jaundiced. Unit 214 was third on the left. Cecily opened the door before I knocked. She was wrapped in a gray robe, hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked genuinely alarmed, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide. "Dad, you smell like smoke." She reached forward and gripped my forearm. "Are you hurt? Are the kids okay?" "We're all okay," I said. "Shaken up. Theo's been coughing, but he's breathing fine. They're in the car downstairs." "Go get them," she said immediately. "Go. I'll get the couch set up." And then Warren appeared. He came down the hall in a white undershirt and gray pajama pants. Dark hair, disheveled arms crossed over his chest. Warren Hartwell was 38 years old, a corporate attorney at a firm downtown, and he carried himself with the particular brand of quiet authority that told you he was used to being the smartest person in whatever room he entered. He was not unkind, exactly, but he was precise, calculating. He noticed things. He noticed me standing in the doorway, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. "Warren," Cecily said, turning toward him with obvious relief. "Dad's house burned down. He has the kids with him. They need to stay a few nights." "How many nights?" Warren said. Not hello. Not are you all right. "How many nights?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "A few, until I can sort something out with the insurance company and find a temporary place." Warren unfolded his arms and rubbed the back of his neck. Cecily. Just her name in a particular tone. A tone that meant they needed to speak privately. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in that exchange, wordless and fast and private, the way long-term couples communicate without opening their mouths, I saw the whole conversation happen without a single word spoken aloud. "Warren." "They have nowhere to go," Cecily said, and I was grateful she said it. I was desperately grateful, even as I noticed that her voice had dropped and gone careful, in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds ago. "We have 900 square feet, Warren said, measured and even. "And my mother is arriving Thursday for 2 weeks. I've told you this for a month, Cecily. We have nowhere to put 4 people. Their family," she said, but the certainty in her voice had already started to thin. "Your father is an adult with resources," Warren said. He turned to me, and to his credit, he looked me in the eye when he said it. "Walter, I'm sorry about the house. That's a terrible thing. But we genuinely don't have the space, and there are emergency resources available for exactly this situation. FEMA assistance, Red Cross emergency shelters. The diocese sometimes opens." Preston said the same thing, I heard myself say, almost word for word. Something moved across Cecily's face fast, like a shadow crossing water. Guilt, or the near relative of it. Her hand still on my forearm loosened its grip by degrees. "Dad," she started. "No." I held up one hand, palm out. My voice was steady, but my hand was shaking, and I couldn't stop it, so I let it shake. "Don't apologize. I don't want an apology tonight. I just want you to know that I heard you." I turned and walked back to the elevator. She called my name once from the doorway. I didn't turn around. Not because I was punishing her, I wasn't. I was too tired for that. But because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't cost me something I couldn't afford to spend right now. I had 3 children in a car on South Peoria Avenue. I had a black garbage bag full of borrowed blankets. I had a tank of gas that was reading just above a quarter. And I had arrived finally, and completely at the understanding that no one was coming. That if anything was going to happen for those 3 kids, it was going to have to start with me. I pressed the elevator button and stood very straight while I waited for it to arrive. The parking lot of Cecily's building was empty except for my car and a dumpster pushed against the far fence. I could see the outline of Sawyer's head through the back window. He'd stayed upright the whole time, just like I'd asked. 8 years old and keeping watch like it was his job. I climbed in and pulled the door shut behind me. The warmth inside the car hit me all at once, and for a single unguarded second, I felt how cold I'd gotten, how thoroughly the rain had worked its way through my shirt and into my bones. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. "She said no too," Sawyer said. It wasn't a question. I turned in my seat to look at him. His face was unreadable in the low light, steady and watchful in a way that belonged on someone twice his age. Wren had fallen back asleep against the door, her breath fogging a small circle on the window glass. Theo was curled across both their laps, one fist tucked under his chin. "She said no too," I confirmed. I didn't see the point in dressing it up. Sawyer nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was filing the information away somewhere deep and private. Then he said, "So what do we do now, Grandpa?" I exhaled. Long and controlled, the kind of breath that's half discipline and half prayer. "I know a place," I said. St. Augustine Catholic Church sat on the corner of Admiral Boulevard and North Cincinnati Avenue, a squat red brick building with a white wooden cross mounted above the double doors. I'd been attending Sunday Mass there for going on 11 years, ever since my wife Eleanor passed, and I needed somewhere to put my hands on Sunday mornings that wasn't an empty house. Father Ambrose had presided over Donovan's funeral service 4 months earlier. He'd stood at that pulpit and spoken about my son with a tenderness that had broken something open in me I hadn't been able to close since. The church lights were off, but the rectory window beside it glowed faint amber. I told the kids to stay put. Sawyer's eyes tracked me all the way to the door and knocked 3 times, then waited, then knocked again, louder. A full minute passed before the door opened. Father Ambrose was a compact, silver-haired man of 61, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a paperback novel still in his left hand. He'd clearly been awake. He looked at me standing on his rectory step, soaked through smelling of smoke eyes that probably told the whole story without me having to open my mouth, and he didn't say a word. He just stepped back and held the door wide open. "Walter," he said finally once I was inside. "Come in out of that rain." "I have the children with me," I said immediately. "Donovan's 3. They're in the car." He was already moving toward the coat rack. "Go get them. I'll put the kettle on." I don't know exactly what I had expected, hesitation, maybe, or a gentle redirect toward the diocesan emergency line. But it wasn't that. It wasn't the immediate, unhesitating opening of a door at 1 o'clock in the morning from a man who had every right to send me elsewhere. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I had to look away from him for a moment before I could trust my voice again. "Thank you," I managed. "Go get those kids, Walter," he said already in the small kitchen, already running water. We can talk after they're warm. Ren woke up confused and started crying the moment I lifted her out of the back seat, not loud, distressed crying, but the soft, disoriented kind that comes from being moved while you're dreaming. I held her against my chest and talked quietly into her hair, the whole walk from the car to the rectory door. I told her we were somewhere safe. I told her Father Ambrose had hot chocolate. I told her Sawyer and Theo were right behind us. She pressed her face into my collar and said, "I want to go home, Grandpa." My jaw tightened so hard it ached. "I know, sweetheart," I said. "I know you do." Inside, Father Ambrose had already unfolded a cot in the small sitting room off the hallway and was arranging 2 couch cushions on the floor beside it, with the focused efficiency of a man who had done this before. He'd laid out a stack of spare blankets, old washed soft from years of use, and a box of animal crackers he'd produced from somewhere in the kitchen, which Theo immediately locked eyes on from across the room and reached toward with both hands, despite still being half asleep. We got the children settled in under 40 minutes. Theo went first, animal crackers still in his fist. Ren curled into the cot and closed her eyes before I'd finished tucking the blanket around her feet. Sawyer lay down on the cushions and stared at the ceiling for a while before his breathing finally went slow and even. Father Ambrose and I sat at the small kitchen table with 2 mugs of black coffee between us. The rain ticked against the window. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the street was completely quiet. "Preston turned you away," Father Ambrose said. Not accusatory, just naming it. "And Cecily," I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the table. "I'm sorry, Walter. I'm genuinely sorry." "Don't be." I turned my own mug in a slow circle. "I'm past sorry. I'm thinking about what comes next." He looked up at that, and something in his expression shifted a careful attention, the kind he brought to conversations that mattered. "Tell me what you need." I thought about that for a long moment. The fire, the insurance company I'd have to call in the morning, 3 children with no clothes but what they were wearing, a daughter who had let her husband speak for her, a son who had cited policy documents at his own father through an intercom. "I need a few days," I said. "Just enough to get my feet under me." "You have them," he said simply. I nodded. I picked up the mug. I drank the coffee, which was strong and slightly bitter, and exactly what I needed, and I sat in Father Ambrose's kitchen and listened to the rain, and let myself, for just that 1 hour, not be the person holding everything together. Morning would arrive soon enough, and with it everything daylight makes impossible to avoid. I did not sleep. I sat in Father Ambrose's kitchen chair until the window above the sink went from black to gray to the pale, washed-out blue that passes for dawn in October. My coffee had gone cold an hour earlier. I hadn't moved it. I'd been making a list in my head, the kind of list you make when panic is right at the edge of your vision, and the only way to keep it from swallowing you whole is to turn everything into a numbered sequence of tasks. 1, call the insurance company. 2, call the fire department's claims liaison. 3, find out what was salvageable from the property. 4, figure out school for the kids. 5, call Margaret Foley. Margaret Foley was a family attorney I'd worked with briefly 2 years earlier when Donovan had needed help drawing up a custody arrangement after a rough patch with Renata. She was 63, sharp as filed metal, and she had the particular quality of never sounding surprised by anything a client told her. I didn't know yet exactly why I needed an attorney. I just knew that I did the way you know a storm is coming before the sky has done anything obvious. I called the insurance company at 7:45 the moment their claims line opened. The woman who answered had a professionally warm voice and a script she followed with quiet precision. She collected my policy number, confirmed the address on Turley Road, and told me a claims adjuster would be in contact within 3 to 5 business days to assess the damage and begin processing. I asked if there was any way to expedite 3 children, no shelter beyond a temporary arrangement, no belongings. She expressed sympathy and told me she would flag the file as urgent. She used the word urgent in the same tone someone uses for the word unfortunately. "What about emergency displacement funds?" I asked. "My policy has an additional living expenses clause." A pause while she pulled up the file. "You're correct, Mr. Cruz. That provision is active. However, disbursement requires adjuster sign-off, which is part of the 3 to 5 day process." I thanked her and set the phone face down on the kitchen table. 3 to 5 days. Father Ambrose was up by 7, moving through his kitchen, with the quiet efficiency of a man who had lived alone for a long time. He made oatmeal for the children without being asked, set out 3 bowls with brown sugar on the side, and poured 2 more cups of coffee, one for himself, one for me, without comment. I was grateful for the lack of comment. There are mornings when being asked how you're doing is a kindness, and mornings when it's just one more thing to manage. Theo ate his oatmeal methodically, 1 small spoonful at a time, still wearing the smoke-stained shirt from the night before. He hadn't said much since waking up, but at some point between the first and second bowl, he looked up at Father Ambrose and said, with the absolute directness that only 4-year-olds possess, "Our house burned up." Father Ambrose looked at him steadily. "I heard that. I'm very sorry, young man." Theo considered this. "Do you have a yard?" "A small one, yes." "Can we see it after breakfast?" "You absolutely can." That was the entirety of Theo's processing, apparently. He went back to his oatmeal. I envied him more than I could say. At 9:15, I drove back to Turley Road alone. Father Ambrose had offered to watch the children. Sawyer had argued quietly but firmly that he should come with me. I'd told him I needed him there with his brother and sister, and he'd accepted that with the same measured composure that was starting to worry me, not because composure was wrong, but because 8-year-olds weren't supposed to need it this much. The house was a shell. The fire department had done what they could, but there wasn't much left worth doing it to. The front wall still stood mostly, and the chimney. Everything else was open to the sky, blackened timber frames, collapsed roofing ash heaped in the corners where rooms used to be. The smell was extraordinary in its wrongness. Smoke and wet char, and something chemical underneath that, made my eyes water. A fire department liaison named Officer Brandt met me at the property line with a clipboard and a hard hat. He walked me through what he could probable ignition point near the kitchen, consistent with an electrical fault in the wall behind the stove. No signs of accelerant. No criminal investigation pending. He handed me a copy of the preliminary incident report and told me to give it to my insurance company. I stood at the edge of what had been my living room for a long time after he left. 41 years in that house. Eleanor and I had bought it young and poor and fixed it up room by room across 3 decades, replacing windows one at a time when we could afford it, painting the kitchen 4 different colors before she found the shade of yellow she wanted. Donovan had learned to walk in that hallway. Preston and Cecily had grown up in those bedrooms. All of it was ash now. I was turning to leave when I saw it. At the far corner of what had been the bedroom, my bedroom, something small and dark, sat intact amid the debris. Square. Metal. The fire had warped and blackened its exterior, but it had not opened it. It had not consumed it. Donovan's fireproof document box. I had given it to him 3 years ago as a birthday gift. The kind of practical, unglamorous present a father gives a son when the son has just bought his first house and the father has spent enough years watching things go wrong to know that documents matter. I hadn't known Donovan had left it here. I hadn't known it was in my room. I picked my way carefully across the debris field, crouched down and pulled it free of the ash. It was locked. I didn't have the key, but I carried it back to the car and set it on the passenger seat, right where Virgil's black garbage bag had sat the night before. I sat there for a moment looking at it, warped lid, scorched handle, the combination dial fused from heat. Whatever Donovan had kept in there, he'd kept it protected. And for reasons I couldn't have explained yet, that felt like something I needed to understand before anything else. Margaret Foley's office was on the 4th floor of a building on South Boston Avenue that smelled of old carpet and fresh coffee in equal measure. Her name was on the door in plain black lettering. No flourishes, no law firm branding, just the name. That had always suited her. She was already at her desk when her assistant showed me in at 10:30, reading glasses on a yellow legal pad open in front of her. She looked up, took in the state of me. I was still in yesterday's clothes, ash under my fingernails, the fireproof box under my arm, and pointed at the chair across from her without preamble. "Sit down, Walter. Tell me everything." So I did. I went through it in order: the fire, the children, Preston's intercom, Cecily's hallway, Father Ambrose's kitchen, the insurance company's 3 to 5 days. I set the fireproof box on the edge of her desk and told her where I'd found it and what I knew about it, which wasn't much. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about her. She let the whole picture assemble itself before she touched any piece of it. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at the box. "Can you open it?" she asked. "The dial is fused. I'd need a locksmith or a drill." She picked up her phone, pressed a button, and said to whoever answered, "Call Reardon's. Tell them I need someone here by noon with box drill capability." She set the phone down and looked back at me. "While we wait the children's legal status. You have physical custody, which is de facto at this point since Renata left and made no legal filing. But you have no formal guardianship order. That's the first thing we fix." "How long does that take?" "Emergency guardianship petition in Tulsa County. I can file today, hearing within 2 weeks if I push. Judge Patricia Owens handles family matters in this district. She is thorough and she does not like loose ends." Margaret tapped her pen against the legal pad. "In the meantime, document everything. Every phone call, every date, every time you've purchased food or clothing or medication for those children since May. Every school drop-off. Everything. I thought about the 6 months since Donovan died. The lunches packed. The pediatric appointments. The school forms signed with my name because there was no one else's name to put. I have most of that," I said. "Get the rest," she said. The locksmith arrived at 11:58. He was a young man, maybe 25, with a tool bag over one shoulder, and the focused, unhurried manner of someone who was good at a specific thing and knew it. He had the box open in under 4 minutes. Margaret and I both leaned forward. Inside, a folded birth certificate for each of the 3 children clipped together. A copy of Donovan's deed to a small lot in Broken Arrow he'd never mentioned to me. A sealed envelope marked in Donovan's handwriting. Neat, careful, the handwriting of a man who took his time with the words, "For Dad, if something happens." And beneath all of that, a stapled document. 8 pages. The header read, "Life Insurance Policy, Continental Mutual Assurance. Policy number 774-DRSU-2201. I picked it up and read the coverage amount on the first page. $180,000. My hands were not entirely steady as I turned to the beneficiary page. Sawyer Allen Cruz, Ren Marie Cruz, Theodore James Cruz. All 3, equal shares. $60,000 each, held in trust until age 25. I put the document down on Margaret's desk and pressed both palms flat against the surface and breathed. "Did you know about this policy?" Margaret asked. "No," I said. "I didn't know he had it." She pulled the document toward her and began reading with the quick scanning efficiency of someone who had read thousands of these. Continental Mutual. Issued 18 months before his death. Premiums paid current through the date of death. She turned to page 4. Named trustee is listed as... She paused, adjusted her glasses. Renata Cruz. The name landed in this room like a stone into standing water. "She knew," I said. Margaret looked at me over her glasses. "That's what we need to determine. The question is whether she disclosed this policy when she left or whether she concealed it. If she concealed it, that's a civil matter fraud against the beneficiaries, and it changes your custody picture considerably." I sat back in my chair. Outside the window, Tulsa went about its Tuesday morning cars, moving people, walking the ordinary machinery of a day that had no idea what was happening in this fourth-floor office on South Boston Avenue. I thought about Renata, the note she'd left. I can't do this anymore. Sorry. I thought about how quickly she'd packed, how she'd been gone within 48 hours of the funeral, how she had never once in the 6 months since asked about her children. I thought about a woman who knew there was $180,000 sitting in an insurance policy and chose to leave 3 children in the care of a 70-year-old man rather than say a single word about it. I called Danny from the parking garage. Danny Cruz was my younger brother, 65 years old, retired carpenter, lived in Broken Arrow, about 20 minutes southeast of Tulsa. We'd grown up in the same 2-bedroom house in Nowata, Oklahoma, shared a room until I was 16, and spent the better part of 50 years being exactly the kind of brothers who didn't need to talk every week to stay close. I had not called him the night of the fire. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because calling Danny made it real in a different way. Danny was practical and steady, and he fixed things, and calling him meant admitting there were things that needed fixing. He picked up on the second ring. Walter. Just my name, but the way he said it, warm, immediate, no question about the hour or the reason, made something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was wound so tight. The house burned down 2 nights ago, I said. I have Donovan's 3 kids. I just found out there's a life insurance policy for 180 that Renata may have been sitting on since May. A beat of silence. Then Danny said, I'm packing a bag right now. I'll be there by dinner. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him he didn't need to come. I just said Father Ambrose's rectory on Admiral Boulevard, second door on the left. I'll find it, he said. I was still standing in the parking garage when my phone buzzed in my hand. Different number. A downtown Tulsa area code I didn't recognize, but the name it resolved to in my contacts stopped me cold. Preston Cruz. He hadn't called me in 6 months. Not once since Donovan's funeral. And now the morning after I'd found a $180,000 insurance policy with his dead brother's children's names on it, my eldest son was calling me from a number I didn't have saved. I stood there in the concrete quiet of the parking garage and looked at his name on the screen, and I let it ring. Before I show you what Walter found inside that box, comment the word open right now so I know you're still here with me. And a quick note, the story ahead contains some fictional elements shaped for narrative and educational purposes. It may not reflect every detail of any single experience. If that's not for you, it's okay to step away now. Danny arrived at 4:57 in the afternoon, which meant he'd left Broken Arrow within 20 minutes of hanging up the phone. He pulled into the church parking lot in his work truck, a dented dark green Ford F250 with a lumber rack on the bed and a faded Cruz & Sons carpentry decal on the rear window. The business name from a company he and Donovan had briefly talked about starting together back when Donovan was first getting into construction work. Danny had never taken the decal off. I'd noticed that every time I saw the truck and never mentioned it. He climbed out and walked toward me with the unhurried stride of a man who has spent 40 years on job sites. Boots heavy on the ground, shoulders square, no wasted motion. He was 3 inches shorter than me, broader through the chest with a gray beard he'd been growing since his wife Carol passed 2 years ago. He looked at me the way only people who have known you your entire life can look at you, taking in everything at once, cataloging it, deciding what to say about it. What he decided to say was, "You look terrible, Walter." "I know," I said. He pulled me into a hug that lasted about 4 seconds, firm, deliberate, no nonsense, and then stepped back and looked at the rectory. Father Ambrose still running the place. Still running it. Good man. He reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a large duffel bag and a plastic grocery sack. Brought some clothes from the donation box at my church in Broken Arrow. Figured the kids could use something clean. And Carol's old lasagna recipe I made a pan this morning. It travels. I looked at the grocery sack. I looked at my brother. My throat did the complicated thing it had been doing since the night of the fire. the tightening that meant something needed to come out that I wasn't ready to let out yet. "Thank you, Danny," I said. "Don't thank me," he said, already walking toward the door. "Show me the kids." Theo took to Danny immediately, which surprised no one who knew either of them. Within 10 minutes of Danny walking through the rectory door, Theo was sitting on his knee, examining the carpenter's calloused hands, with the focused scientific interest of a 4-year-old who has just discovered the most interesting object in the room. Danny explained with complete seriousness that each callus had a name and a story, and proceeded to invent increasingly elaborate ones on the spot, while Theo listened with his mouth slightly open. Ren ate 2 helpings of lasagna and asked Danny if he was going to live with them now. Danny glanced at me across the table. "For a little while," he said carefully, "to help your grandpa with some things." Ren seemed to find this satisfactory. She went back to her lasagna. Sawyer characteristically waited until the younger 2 were occupied before approaching Danny. He came and sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "Did you know my dad well?" Danny set his fork down. He gave Sawyer the full weight of his attention, no deflection, no softening. "I knew your dad since he was younger than you are right now," he said. "He was a good man, Sawyer. He worked hard and he kept his word. You've got his eyes, you know that." Sawyer absorbed this carefully. Then he nodded once and got up and went back to his brother and sister. And I understood that he'd gotten exactly what he'd come to the table to find out. After the children were settled for the night, Danny and I sat in Father Ambrose's kitchen with the fireproof box open on the table between us. I had not yet opened Donovan's letter. I'd carried it with me all day in my jacket pocket, while I sat in Margaret's office in my hand in the parking garage on the passenger seat on the drive back. I'd been putting it off with the same complicated avoidance I recognized from the week after Eleanor died, when I couldn't open the sympathy cards, because opening them meant accepting the reason they'd been sent. Danny looked at the envelope, looked at me, said nothing. I picked it up and broke the seal. Donovan's handwriting inside was the same as on the envelope. Careful, unhurried, the handwriting of a man who knew what he was writing and took his time getting it right. "Dad, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I'm not there to handle this myself. The insurance policy is real. I took it out 18 months ago when I started working the Broken Arrow site, the heights, the equipment. I just had a feeling I should have something in place. The kids are the beneficiaries. All 3 of them equal. Renata is listed as trustee because at the time it made sense. It doesn't make sense anymore. I was going to change it. I didn't get there in time. I need you to make sure she doesn't touch that money. It's for Sawyer and Ren and Theo, not for her. Get a lawyer involved if you have to. Get whoever you have to involved. There's one more thing. Conrad Bellamy, he was my business partner on the Broken Arrow project. He knows things about how the site was run that I never got to follow up on. He's a good man, Dad. Trust him. He'll know what to do with what he knows. Take care of my kids. I know you will. You always did. Donovan, I read the letter twice. The second time, my voice was steadier than the first. Danny hadn't moved. When I finished, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine for a moment, just a moment, and then took it back. "Conrad Bellamy," he said. "You know him." "Never met him," I said. Donovan mentioned the Broken Arrow project, but I didn't know the names of the people he was working with. Danny turned the name over. "Bellamy. I might know the name from somewhere. Construction circles in Broken Arrow aren't that big." He pulled out his phone and typed something briefly. "I'll ask around tomorrow." I folded the letter and held it in both hands. Outside, the October night pressed quiet against the rectory windows. Inside, the lasagna pan sat empty in the drying rack, and somewhere down the hall, 3 children were sleeping in borrowed blankets, and my brother was across the table from me and Donovan's words were in my hands. And somewhere across the city, Preston Cruz had left a voicemail I still hadn't listened to. I pulled out my phone, pressed play. His voice came through the speaker flat and controlled, stripped of the sleep roughness from the night before. Professional. The voice he used when he wanted something. Dad, I've been thinking about last night, and I want you to know I genuinely feel terrible about how that conversation went. I've spoken with my insurance broker this morning just to understand your situation better, and I think there may be some complications with your homeowner's claim you should be aware of. Call me back when you can. We should talk. The message ended. I set the phone on the table. Danny looked at it. Complications with your homeowner's claim, he repeated slowly. He spoke to your insurance broker. That's what he said. Walter. Danny's voice had gone careful and deliberate in a way I recognized from the job site, the tone he used when something wasn't adding up, and he needed to say so plainly. Why would Preston be talking to your insurance broker? I didn't have an answer, but the question sat in the kitchen with us for a long time after that heavy and still like smoke that hadn't cleared. Before I reveal what Conrad Bellamy handed Walter across that coffee table, comment truth below. Because what's coming next will change how you see this entire story. Note this story includes fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. Names and details are not drawn from any specific individual, but what happens next is something worth staying for. Danny found Conrad Bellamy in 2 phone calls. The construction world in Broken Arrow was exactly as small as Danny had predicted, a network of contractors, site managers, and subcontractors who had all at some point worked the same projects, borrowed the same equipment, or shared the same coffee at the same supply yard on East Kenosha Street. Danny knew a framer who knew a project manager who had worked the same Broken Arrow commercial development site where Donovan had died. Conrad Bellamy, it turned out, had been the primary contractor on that project. He had also, according to Danny's source, not taken a new contract since the accident. He lived in a single-story house on South Elm Place in Broken Arrow, 12 minutes from the site where Donovan had fallen. We drove out on a Thursday morning, Danny and I leaving the children with Father Ambrose and Ms. Eleanor Dunbar Wren's first-grade teacher, who had appeared at the rectory on Wednesday afternoon with 2 bags of school supplies, a box of crayons, and the particular calm authority of a woman who had spent 25 years managing rooms full of frightened children. She had taken one look at the situation and said, "I'll come by mornings until you have something stable in place." I hadn't asked her to. She'd simply decided. Conrad Bellamy answered his door on the first knock. He was 53 years old, heavier than his driver's license photo suggested. Danny had found that through the contractor licensing board, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of deep weathering around the eyes that comes from years of working outdoors. He was wearing a flannel shirt and holding a mug of coffee, and when he saw me standing on his porch, he went very still. "You're Walter," he said, not a question. "I am," I said. He stepped back from the door. "Come in, both of you." His living room was clean and spare, a couch, a wooden coffee table, a bookshelf with more tools, catalogs than books, and a framed photograph on the wall near the window that I recognized immediately. It was a job site photo, the kind taken on the first day of a big project. A dozen workers lined up in front of an unfinished frame with their hard hats pushed back and their arms around each other's shoulders. Donovan was in the middle of the back row, grinning. I stood in front of that photograph for a moment, before I could make myself sit down. Conrad sat across from us and wrapped both hands around his mug, the same way Father Ambrose had with his coffee the night of the fire. And I was struck by the similarity, 2 men holding something warm while they prepared to say something hard. "I've been waiting for you to come," Conrad said. "I didn't know how to reach you directly. Donovan talked about you, but I didn't have a number." "He left a letter," I said. "He named you in it, said you knew things about the site that he hadn't gotten to follow up on." Conrad's jaw tightened. He set his mug down carefully. "The accident wasn't an accident," he said. "Not entirely." The room went very quiet. Danny beside me on the couch didn't move. "Tell me what you mean by that," I said. Conrad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke in the measured, precise way of a man who had been rehearsing this for months. The Broken Arrow commercial development, a mixed-use project retail ground floor offices above, had been subcontracted through a holding company called Meridian Build Group. Meridian had won the bid at a price that Conrad, with 30 years of site experience, knew was too low. Cutting costs on a project that size meant one of three things: cheaper materials, fewer workers, or reduced safety compliance. Meridian had chosen all three. Donovan had flagged the scaffolding system to the site foreman 2 weeks before his death. The scaffolding on the east elevation was showing stress fractures in the bracket welds, not catastrophic yet, but requiring immediate replacement. The foreman had logged the complaint, sent it up the chain, and received instructions to continue operations while a review was scheduled. The review was never scheduled. 3 days after Donovan submitted his written complaint, Conrad had a copy. The east elevation scaffolding failed. Donovan fell 22 feet. OSHA came out after, Conrad said. They cited Meridian for 7 violations. 5 of them were directly related to the scaffolding system Donovan had flagged. The citations are public record. I can pull them up right now if you need. Who owns Meridian Build Group? Danny asked. His voice was level, but I could see his hand pressed flat and hard against his knee. Conrad looked at Danny. Then he looked at me. Meridian Build Group is a shell holding company, he said carefully. It was set up 18 months before the project started. The registered owner of record is a man named Elliot Vance, but the operating capital, the actual money that funded the bid, traces back through 2 LLCs to a private real estate investment portfolio. He paused. The portfolio is managed by Preston Cruz. I heard Danny draw a slow breath through his nose beside me. I did not move. I did not look away from Conrad. I held his gaze and felt the information settle into me, the way cold water settles, spreading outward, finding every space, changing the temperature of everything it touched. Preston, my son, the man who had stood behind a wrought iron gate 3 nights ago and told me to call the Red Cross. The man who had called my insurance broker the morning after. Are you certain? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended, stripped of everything except the question itself. I have the LLC registration documents, Conrad said. I have the capital transfer records. I've had them since July. I hired a forensic accountant in August to verify the chain. He reached beside his chair and picked up a manila folder thick with paper and held it out across the coffee table. I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know who to trust. Donovan told me if anything ever happened to go to you. So here. I took the folder. It was heavier than it looked. There's one more thing, Conrad said. He picked up his mug again, but didn't drink from it. Preston's company, the main one, Cruz Capital Properties, has been over-leveraged for about 14 months. He's been using shell projects to generate paper revenue and keep his lenders from calling his loans. The Broken Arrow site was one of 3. If the OSHA violations and the LLC connection become public, his entire financing structure collapses. I looked down at the folder in my hands. I thought about Donovan standing on that scaffolding, writing up a complaint in good faith, sending it up a chain of command that ultimately led back to his own brother's portfolio. I thought about the note Renata had left, the insurance policy she hadn't mentioned, the 6 months of silence from Preston and Cecily. I thought about Theo asking Father Ambrose if he had a yard. Mr. Bellamy, I said, I need you to be willing to talk to an attorney. Conrad looked at me steadily. I've been ready since July, he said. I was just waiting for the right person to hand this to. Margaret Foley did not raise her voice when I laid Conrad's folder open on her desk. That was the thing about Margaret. She had practiced law for 38 years, and somewhere in those 38 years, she had developed the ability to receive catastrophic information with the same external composure she brought to scheduling a deposition. She read through the LLC registration documents first, then the capital transfer records, then the forensic accountant's summary turning pages with steady, methodical hands, while I sat across from her and watched her read. When she finished, she closed the folder, removed her reading glasses, and set them on the desk with a small, precise click. Preston Cruz, she said, in the tone of someone confirming a diagnosis they'd suspected, but hoped was wrong. Funded a construction company that cut safety compliance costs on a project where his own brother was working, received written notification of a structural hazard through that company's chain of command, took no corrective action, and Donovan died as a result. That's what the documents show, I said. And he called your insurance broker the morning after you found the policy documents. Yes. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone without words, but the quiet of someone sorting through too many words to choose which ones to use first. Walter, she said finally, I want to be precise with you about what we're looking at, because I don't want you walking out of here with the wrong picture. She reopened the folder to the forensic accountant's summary. The connection between Preston's portfolio and Meridian Build Group establishes civil liability exposure, negligence, potentially gross negligence in Donovan's death. That is a wrongful death civil suit, which you can file on behalf of Donovan's estate and his children as surviving dependents. Oklahoma statute of limitations on wrongful death is 2 years from date of death. Donovan died May 2023. We have until May 2025. We have time, but not unlimited time. And the insurance broker call, Danny asked. He'd come with me again. He sat in the chair beside mine with the manila folder balanced on his knee, and his arms crossed, and his expression the careful neutral of a man paying very close attention. That, Margaret said, is potentially more immediate. If Preston contacted your insurer and made representations that affected your claim delayed, it redirected it, flagged it for additional scrutiny in any way that is insurance interference. It's a separate civil matter, and depending on what he actually said to them, it could also constitute tortious interference with a contract. She picked up her pen. I'm going to need a full copy of your policy, the name of the adjuster assigned to your claim, and every interaction you've had with the company since the fire. I'm going to contact them directly. I pulled the insurance documents from the envelope I'd been carrying and slid them across the desk. Margaret took them without comment and clipped them to a fresh legal pad. Now, guardianship. I filed the emergency petition yesterday morning as discussed. Judge Patricia Owens has it on her docket. Hearing is set for November 8th, that's 11 days from today. I need you to bring documentation of every expense you've incurred for those children since May, medical, educational, food, clothing. Everything. Receipts where you have them, bank statements where you don't. I've been keeping records, I said. Not perfectly, but consistently. Bring what you have. I'll work with what you bring. She made a note on the legal pad. One more thing, Renata. The named trustee on Donovan's policy. Has she made any contact since she left in May? None. No calls, no letters, no contact with the children. Nothing. Margaret wrote that down too, underlining it twice. Her absence will matter in court. 6 months of zero contact with 3 children she was legally a stepmother to is a significant factor. Judge Owens will want to know that. She stood, which was her signal that the meeting was concluding. Walter, I want to be honest with you. You are in a complicated legal position, but it is not a weak one. You have documented custody of record 6 months of demonstrated care, a letter from Donovan establishing his intent. OSHA violations on public record, and a forensic accountant's report linking Preston's capital to the negligent company. That is not nothing. That is the beginning of something. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. What's the first thing that happens? The first thing that happens, Margaret said, already reaching for her phone, is I call Continental Mutual and find out exactly what Preston Cruz said to them. The temporary apartment was on North Peoria Avenue, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like industrial cleaner and had a radiator that knocked every 20 minutes like someone politely asking to be let in from the cold. It was not beautiful. The carpet was the color of old mustard, and the kitchen had exactly one working burner on the stove, and the bedroom window looked directly into the brick wall of the adjacent building. I had found it through a rental listing service, paid the first month and deposit from what remained of my checking account, and moved us in on a Saturday afternoon. Danny carried everything in a single trip because everything we had fit in the black garbage bag Virgil had given us, plus 2 additional bags of donated clothes and the fireproof box. Theo stood in the center of the living room and turned in a slow circle, examining the space with the comprehensive attention of someone conducting an official inspection. "It's small," he said. "It is," I agreed. "It smells funny." "It does." He turned another quarter circle. "Can I have the bottom bunk?" "There isn't a bunk yet," I said. "We're working on it." "Okay." He sat down cross-legged on the mustard carpet, apparently satisfied. "I'm going to sit here until there is one." Ren had gone directly to the window and was pressing her nose against the glass, looking at the brick wall, with the focused interest of someone who had decided to find it interesting by sheer force of will. "Grandpa," she said without turning around, "there's a bird on that ledge." "Is there? It's just sitting there. It's not doing anything." "Maybe it's thinking," I said. She considered this seriously. "About what?" "Same thing I'm thinking about, probably," I said. "What comes next?" She turned from the window then and looked at me with Donovan's eyes, dark and direct, and entirely too perceptive for 6 years old, and said, "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Grandpa?" My throat tightened. I kept my face steady. "Yes," I told her, "we are going to be okay." Sawyer was standing in the doorway of the smaller bedroom. He hadn't said anything since we'd arrived. He looked at me across the length of that small, mustard-carpeted living room, and then he nodded once, short, and certain the way he'd nodded in the car outside Preston's gate, and went to help Danny figure out where the beds were going. We were 11 days from the guardianship hearing. We were in a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 working burner and a knocking radiator and a bird on a brick ledge outside the window. And for the first time since the night the house burned down, I had a door I could lock from the inside. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Nobody warns you about the middle. People talk about the moment. Everything falls apart. The fire. The door that doesn't open. The parking garage, where you stand in the dark, listening to your son's voicemail and feeling the ground shift under 40 years of assumption. They talk about that. And they talk about the other end, where things come together, where the story resolves into something you can hold up and say, "Look, it meant something." But the middle, the long, grinding, unglamorous middle, nobody mentions that part. Maybe because there's nothing cinematic about reheating soup on 1 working burner at 6 in the morning, while a 4-year-old coughs in the next room, and you're calculating whether the checking account will cover groceries and Theo's follow-up appointment at the same time. That was November. That was most of November. The guardianship hearing on November 8th lasted 47 minutes. Judge Patricia Owens reviewed every document Margaret had submitted, asked me 4 direct questions about the children's living situation, schooling and medical care, and granted emergency guardianship before noon. I sat in the hallway afterward, with the paperwork in my hands, and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding since May. Not joy, not clean relief, more like a knot being cut so that whatever was wound up in it could finally move. Margaret sat beside me and said, "That's the first one. Don't stop moving." I didn't. The days organized themselves into survival's rhythm. Up at 5:31, working burner going by 6. Theo always appeared first, socks sideways, hair shuffling directly to the stove to conduct his inspection. "Oatmeal again," he said one morning. Not accusatory, just noting it. "Oatmeal again," I confirmed. "Do we have the brown sugar?" "We have the brown sugar." He climbed onto his chair and picked up his spoon. "Okay, that's acceptable." I turned back to the stove before he could see me smile. Sawyer turned 9 that November. Quietly, he asked for pancakes instead of cake, and Danny made them without being asked. Ren had good mornings and bad mornings. The bad ones, she came to the table with eyes already red, pushing oatmeal around her bowl. Why doesn't Aunt Cecily want to see us? She asked one Tuesday in the third week of November. Aunt Cecily is going through her own things right now, I said carefully. But we're her family. Yes, I said. You are. She looked up with Donovan's eyes dark, direct, seeing more than they were supposed to. That should matter more than her own things, she said. She was right. 6-year-olds shouldn't be right about things like that. Eat your oatmeal, sweetheart, I said. She did. But she didn't look convinced by anything. Virgil Monroe drove out from Turley on a Saturday in mid-November with a truck full of donated furniture, a bunk bed frame, a kitchen table, 2 reading lamps. He and Danny spent 4 hours assembling the bunk bed while Theo provided running commentary from the doorway. When it was finished, Theo climbed to the top bunk, spread his arms wide, and announced to the ceiling that this was the best bed in the world. Ren told him it was the only bed in the world for them. Theo said that still counted. I shook Virgil's hand on the sidewalk when he left. He gripped it hard. You're doing right by those kids, Walter. Don't let anybody tell you different. Plain, direct, no cushioning. Then he drove back to Turley, and I stood on the sidewalk until his taillights disappeared. The nights were the hardest part. After the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof box, and Donovan's letter, and Conrad's folder. And I thought about my son. Not the accident, but Donovan himself, the way he called every Sunday morning without fail. The way he'd taken out that insurance policy 18 months before he needed it, because he had a feeling. Careful, responsible, thinking ahead. He'd thought ahead, and it still hadn't been enough. Some nights the grief pressed down on the top of my head like a physical weight, and when I couldn't press back anymore, I went to the bathroom, turned on the faucet so no one would hear, and let myself cry for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I turned the faucet off, dried my face, and went back to the table. Because morning was always coming, and morning meant oatmeal and brown sugar and Theo in the doorway in his socks. That was worth getting up for. That was worth all of it. My phone rang on a Friday evening in late November. Margaret Foley. Walter, she said. And something in that single word told me she had found something. I spoke with Continental Mutual today. And then I spoke with their legal department. I sat down at the kitchen table. Tell me, I said. Preston called them, she said. 4 days after the fire. He flagged your claim as having irregularities, and it worked. Your file has been sitting in secondary review for 3 weeks. Nothing moving. The kitchen was very quiet. Can you fix it? I asked. I've already started, she said. But Walter, what Preston did is deliberate. This changes what we're filing. I gripped the phone tighter. How much does it change? I asked. And what she said next was something I needed the rest of the night to sit with. She had filed 3 things. That was the first thing Margaret told me when I arrived at her office on the Monday after her Friday call, Danny beside me again. The manila folder from Conrad tucked under my arm, even though she already had copies of everything. Some things you carry with you, not because they're needed, but because leaving them somewhere feels wrong. Margaret stood at her desk rather than sitting. She did that sometimes. I'd noticed when she was in the part of a case that required momentum rather than deliberation. She had yellow legal pads fanned across the desk surface and a second cup of coffee going, which told me she'd been there since early. 3 filings, she said, picking up the first legal pad. First, a formal complaint to the Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner documenting Preston's communication with Continental Mutual, the specific language he used with the adjuster, and the effect it had on your claim timeline. That complaint triggers a mandatory investigation. The insurer is now legally required to resume normal processing of your claim within 14 business days or face regulatory review. She set that pad down and picked up the second. Second, a civil suit for tortious interference with contract filed against Preston Cruz, individually in Tulsa County District Court. The theory is straightforward. He knew you had a valid active homeowner's insurance contract. He intentionally contacted the insurer and made false or misleading representations about your policy and those representations caused measurable financial harm to you. The fact that he used an unfamiliar number to call the number that showed up on your phone that night suggests he was aware that what he was doing required some degree of concealment. Danny let out a slow breath through his nose. He called from a different number so Walter wouldn't pick up, he said. That's the inference, yes, Margaret said. And it's a useful one. It speaks to intent. She set down the second pad and picked up the third. Third is the one that took me the weekend to structure correctly because it involves Donovan's estate and the children's interests simultaneously. She looked at me over her reading glasses. We are filing a wrongful death civil suit against Meridian Build Group and its parent entities, including the LLCs that trace to Preston's portfolio, on behalf of Donovan's estate. Oklahoma statute allows surviving family members to bring this action within 2 years of death. The named plaintiffs will be the 3 children as surviving dependents with you as their legal guardian acting on their behalf. The room was very quiet for a moment. You're suing Preston for Donovan's death, I said. We are pursuing civil liability for the negligent conditions that caused Donovan's death, Margaret said carefully. The connection to Preston is through the corporate structure Meridian Build Group, which his capital funded, which employed the site management that ignored Donovan's scaffolding complaint, which resulted in his death. It is not a criminal proceeding. It is civil. But the standard of proof is lower, and the documentation Conrad has provided is substantial. I thought about Donovan's letter. Get whoever you have to involved. What does Conrad need to do? I asked. Conrad needs to give a formal deposition, Margaret said. His testimony combined with the forensic accountant's report and the OSHA violation records forms the evidentiary core of the wrongful death suit. I've spoken with him twice since Thursday. He's ready. He's been ready. She set all 3 legal pads down and looked at me directly. Walter, I want to be honest with you about something. Please, I said. This is going to take time. Civil litigation in Oklahoma, particularly cases involving corporate structures and multiple defendants, does not resolve quickly. We are looking at a process that will likely run 12 to 18 months, from filing to judgment, assuming it doesn't settle early, and there is a reasonable chance Preston's attorneys will attempt to settle rather than let this go to full discovery, because full discovery means the documentation and the OSHA records become part of the public court file. And if he settles, Danny asked, then we negotiate terms that serve Walter and the children. Settlement is not failure. Settlement can be the right outcome. She looked at me. But I want you prepared for the longer path, because I don't know yet which one he'll choose. I nodded. What do I need to do right now? Right now, Margaret said, you go home, you keep those receipts, you keep that guardianship paperwork current, and you let me do my job. She picked up her coffee cup. And you call me the moment Preston Cruz makes any direct contact with you. Any contact. A text, a voicemail, a card in the mail, anything. Conrad Bellamy came to Margaret's office 2 days later for the preliminary deposition. I wasn't in the room for the deposition itself that was between Conrad Margaret and Margaret's associate, a young woman named Claire Adler, who took notes with the focused speed of someone who had learned to write faster than people talk. But Conrad arrived at the office at the same time I did, and we sat in the waiting area for 10 minutes before he was called back, drinking bad waiting room coffee and not saying much. At one point, he looked at the framed print on the wall across from us, a generic landscape, green hills, blue sky, the kind of art that exists specifically to give people something neutral to look at in waiting rooms, and said, without preamble, I should have pushed harder after the OSHA inspection. I should have gone to the press or the DA's office or somewhere. Instead, I hired an accountant and sat on what I had. You were waiting for the right person, I said. I was scared, he said, with the precision of a man correcting a polite misstatement. I'm a contractor. Preston Cruz runs capital through half the development projects in this county. Being on the wrong side of that conversation has consequences. I looked at him. And now, he turned from the landscape print and met my eyes. Now Donovan's dead and his kids are in a 2-bedroom apartment on North Peoria Avenue, and the man responsible is calling insurance brokers at 7 in the morning. He set his coffee cup down on the side table. Now I'm less scared of the consequences than I am of what it means if I stay quiet. He was called back to the deposition room a few minutes later. I sat in the waiting area and drank the bad coffee and thought about what Margaret had said 12 to 18 months. The long path. I thought about Theo on the mustard carpet asking about the bunk bed. I thought about Wren's bird on the brick ledge. I thought about Sawyer's composition notebook and its careful questions. 12 to 18 months. That was a long time to hold things together. But I had held things together for 6 months already since May, since the phone call that had come to the construction site on a Tuesday morning and changed everything. And the 6 months had not broken me. They had worn me down in places, ground certain softnesses away, but they had not broken me. I thought about Danny's truck pulling into the church parking lot at 4:57 in the afternoon. I thought about Virgil's black garbage bag pressed into my arms in the rain. I thought about Father Ambrose holding the rectory door open without a single question. You find out in the middle of things who the people are. Danny was waiting at the apartment when I got back that evening. He'd made chili from scratch. The apartment smelled of cumin and onion from 3 floors down, and Theo was sitting on the kitchen counter watching the pot with the solemn focus of an apprentice chef observing a master at work. "He won't let me stir it," Theo reported the moment I walked in. "You stir too fast," Danny said, not looking up from the pot. "You make it angry." "Chili can't be angry," Theo said. "Oklahoma chili can absolutely be angry," Danny said. "You have no idea." Wren was at the kitchen table doing homework, and Sawyer was in the bedroom they shared, and I could hear the faint scratch of pencil on paper that meant he was working on something he didn't want interrupted. The composition notebook, probably. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just breathing the smell of the chili and listening to Danny and Theo argue about whether food could have emotions and let the ordinariness of it settle over me like something warm. It was a Wednesday evening in December. 3 legal filings were working their way through the Tulsa County court system. Conrad Bellamy's deposition was on the record. And somewhere across the city in a 3-story cream-colored house on Riverside Drive behind a wrought iron gate, Preston Cruz was going about his evening with no idea yet how much had shifted. He would find out soon enough. The news when it came didn't arrive the way I expected. It never does. The Tulsa World ran it on a Thursday morning in the 2nd week of January. I found out the way most people find out things they weren't expecting secondhand through someone else's reaction to it. Danny had gone out early to pick up groceries, and he came back with 2 paper bags and a folded newspaper tucked under his arm, and he set both bags on the counter without unpacking them and put the newspaper on the kitchen table in front of me without saying anything. He just pressed it flat with one hand and stepped back. The headline was in the business section, below the fold, "Tulsa Developer Faces Lender Action as Debt Structure Unravels." The subheading read, "Cruz Capital Properties Among Multiple Firms Under Scrutiny Following OSHA Violations Linked to Fatal Construction Accident." I read the article twice. The reporter had done solid work. She'd pulled the OSHA citation records public, as Conrad had said, and traced the corporate connection between Meridian Build Group and 2 other shell development companies, both of which had received capital from the same private real estate portfolio. She hadn't named Preston directly in the headline, but the article named Cruz Capital Properties 4 times and quoted 2 unnamed sources described as former associates of the firm. One of them said in language careful enough to suggest legal review before publication that the capital structure of Cruz Capital Properties had been described internally as, quote, "a house of cards that required continuous new project revenue to keep the existing debt serviced." A house of cards, I sat with that phrase for a while. Danny poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me and let me read. When I looked up, he said, "The Ashworths called me last night. I didn't want to say anything until I had something more solid." The Ashworths. Gerald and Marta Ashworth were longtime neighbors of mine on Turley Road, the kind of couple who knew everyone's business in the way that only people who have lived in the same neighborhood for 30 years can know it without being intrusive about it. Gerald had worked in commercial real estate for most of his career before retiring. He had also, I learned now, played golf with Preston on occasion over the past several years. "What did Gerald say?" I asked. "He said Preston's been fielding calls from his lenders since November," Danny said. 2 of the development projects had draws coming due in December, money the lenders were expecting to see deployed on construction progress. The money wasn't there. Or rather, it was there on paper, but the paper turned out to be the shell companies, and the shell companies turned out to be connected to each other in ways that the lenders hadn't known about. "The forensic accountant's report," I said. "Margaret filed it as an exhibit in the wrongful death suit," Danny said. "Once it was in the public court record, anyone could pull it. A reporter pulling OSHA records would find the suit. Finding the suit, she'd find the exhibit." I looked at the newspaper again. It occurred to me sitting at that mustard-carpeted kitchen table in the apartment on North Peoria Avenue that Preston had spent 14 months constructing a financial architecture designed to generate the appearance of solvency. New project revenue flowing in to service old project debt, shell companies holding the structural weight, a surface that looked solid from outside because he had made very sure it looked that way. He had let the scaffolding show stress fractures and chosen to let the review go unscheduled because fixing it cost money he didn't have to spend. And Donovan had flagged it, in writing, 2 weeks before he died. I folded the newspaper and set it to one side. Margaret called at 9:15. "You've seen the article," she said. "This morning," I said. "Good. I want you to understand what this means for our filings." Her voice had the focused quality it carried when she was moving fast through a chain of logic. "The lender action against Cruz Capital is separate from our civil suit, but it creates a parallel pressure that is useful to us. Preston's attorneys, and he has retained a firm, Colby and Marsh, downtown. I received their appearance notice yesterday, are now managing 2 simultaneous crises. That changes their calculus on settlement." "You think he'll want to settle faster now?" I asked. "I think his attorneys will advise him to," Margaret said. "Going to full discovery in our wrongful death suit means everything. Conrad has the LLC documents, the forensic accountant's chain, the OSHA citations, the timeline of Donovan's written complaint becomes formally entered into evidence and available for public inspection. His lenders are already nervous. Evidence of gross negligence in a fatal workplace accident, linked directly to his capital in a public court file, is the kind of thing that turns nervous lenders into lenders who call their lawyers." I understood. "So the suit itself is leverage even before judgment." "Correct," Margaret said. "We are not in a weak position, Walter. We are in a position that gets stronger the longer Preston waits to address it." A pause. "His attorneys may reach out to me directly in the coming weeks. If Preston contacts you personally, any form of contact, call me before you respond to anything." "Understood," I said. "One more thing." Her voice shifted slightly, a change in register so small I almost missed it. "Continental Mutual has resumed processing your homeowner's claim. The insurance commissioner's complaint worked. An adjuster is scheduled to visit the Turley Road property on January 19th. Emergency living expense disbursement should follow within 10 days of the visit." I sat back in my chair. 3 months. 3 months of mustard carpet and 1 working burner and borrowed blankets and groceries, calculated to the dollar. And now finally the money I'd been paying premiums on for 11 years was going to be released, because a lawyer had filed a complaint, and the right regulatory body had applied the right pressure. "Thank you, Margaret," I said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "There's still a long road." The children didn't know about the newspaper article. I'd put it in the recycling before Sawyer came out for breakfast, and neither Wren nor Theo had any particular interest in the business section of the Tulsa World. I intended to keep it that way for as long as I reasonably could. They knew that something legal was happening. Sawyer had asked precisely and directly whether Grandpa was in trouble, and I'd told him that Grandpa was using the legal system to make sure certain things were handled correctly, which was the truth arranged at an appropriate angle. He'd nodded and let it go, for now. What the children did know, because they could feel it. The way children feel atmospheric pressure changes before a storm was that something in the apartment had shifted slightly. That the tightness that had lived in the walls since October was not gone but was beginning to breathe somehow. That Danny wasn't quite as careful with his words at dinner. That I sat at the kitchen table some evenings without the manila folder in front of me, just with a cup of coffee and the knocking radiator for company, and didn't look like the weight of everything was actively pressing me into the chair. Wren noticed first. She came and sat beside me on a Friday evening in late January, tucking her feet up under her on the couch the way she always did, and said, "Grandpa, are things getting better?" I looked at her. "Some things are," I said honestly. "Some things are still being worked on." She seemed to find this a reasonable answer. She leaned against my arm and looked at the television, which wasn't on, and after a moment said, "I think they're getting better. It feels different in here." "Different how?" I asked. She thought about it. "Like when a window opens," she said. "You can't always see the air moving, but you can tell." I put my arm around her, and she settled into my side, and we sat there in the quiet of the apartment, while Theo's voice drifted in from the bedroom, where he was explaining something at length to Danny, and the radiator knocked its steady 20-minute knock, and outside the window, the January night pressed cold and dark against the glass. It was Virgil Monroe who brought it to my attention. First, the other thing that was coming, the thing that hadn't arrived yet, but was already moving in our direction. He called on a Sunday afternoon in early February, and he led with the weather and the state of his gutters the way he always did, establishing the ordinary before he got to the point. "Walter," he said finally. "I don't want to alarm you, but I got a call from my neighbor's daughter over in Sand Springs 2 days ago. She said a woman had been asking around, asking about you, about the children." I set my coffee cup down. "What woman?" I asked. Virgil was quiet for just a beat too long. "She didn't leave a name," he said. "But she described her. Walter, it sounds like it might be Renata. She didn't call first. I had half expected that a phone call, something to announce herself at a safe remove. But Renata appeared at the North Peoria apartment on a Tuesday morning in the second week of February, without warning, standing in the hallway, in a gray wool coat I didn't recognize, hair shorter than it had been in May, hands folded in front of her, with a composure that looked practiced. "Walter," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. The coat, the haircut, the careful posture, the absence of anything resembling the woman who had left a note on the kitchen table and been gone within 48 hours of my son's funeral. "Renata," I said, "come in." She sat on the couch. I sat across from her in the chair. Neither of us offered coffee because this was not that kind of visit, and we both understood that. "I know what you must think of me," she said. "Do you?" I said. Not a question. She pressed her lips together briefly. "I was in a bad place after Donovan died. I wasn't capable of being what those children needed. I made a decision I thought was, 'You left 3 children,' I said. My voice was level. Level was more useful than the alternative. You left 3 children who had just lost their father with a note that said sorry, and you have not called or written in 9 months. I need you to understand that I know all of that before this conversation continues." She looked at her hands. "I know. Tell me about the insurance policy," I said. The composure cracked a small thing, a tightening around the eyes, a half second where the prepared expression slipped. Then she reassembled herself. "I found out about the policy a few weeks after Donovan died," she said carefully. "A few weeks," I repeated. I wasn't sure what to do. I was the named trustee, but the children were the beneficiaries, and I was leaving, and I didn't. You knew, I said. You knew there was $180,000 in a policy with your children's names on it, and you left without saying a single word about it. For 9 months. The silence that followed was not comfortable for either of us. Yes, she said finally. I knew. I stood up. I think you should leave. And I think you should call a lawyer before you contact me or the children again. She stood too, and something shifted in her expression. The rehearsed composure replaced by something harder. Walter, I'm not here to ask your permission. I've already filed. My attorney submitted a custody modification petition to Tulsa County Family Court last week to restore my custodial rights as the children's surviving parent of record. The words settled in the room. You filed for custody, I said. I filed to restore what is legally mine, she said. I am their mother by marriage. My attorney believes the case is straightforward. She picked up her bag. I thought you deserved to hear it from me directly rather than from a process server. She walked to the door and let herself out. I stood in the living room and looked at the children's drawings on the kitchen wall. Wren's labeled Our Bed. Theo's horse with its uphill letters. I picked up my phone and called Margaret. Margaret received the information without flinching. She has a legal basis to file, Margaret said once I'd finished. Oklahoma family law preserves certain rights for a surviving step-parent of record. Her attorney isn't wrong. However, she paused. The court's primary consideration is the best interest of the children, and that analysis involves factors that are not favorable to Renata, such as, I said, 9 months of zero contact, no financial contribution, departure within 48 hours of the funeral without arranging for the children's welfare, and concealment of a life insurance policy naming those children as beneficiaries, which we have already documented in the civil fraud claim. I heard papers moving on her end. We bring all of it into the custody hearing. Judge Owens will see the full picture. When is the hearing? I asked. Family court moves faster than civil court on custody. 4 to 6 weeks from the petition filing date. I'll have a firm date by end of week. A pause. Walter, do the children ask about her? I thought about Wren's question in November, pushing oatmeal around her bowl. Why doesn't Aunt Cecily want to see us? She hadn't been specifically asking about Renata, but Renata was part of what she meant. I thought about Theo, who had adjusted with the pragmatic efficiency of a 4-year-old, who reorganizes his world around what is actually present in it. I thought about Sawyer, who had never once asked about Renata in 9 months, and whose silence on the subject felt like its own clear answer. Sawyer doesn't ask, I said. Theo has adjusted. Wren asked once why the people who were supposed to be family weren't acting like it. I'll need statements from Ms. Dunbar and Dr. Simmons about the children's stability, Margaret said. Call them today. I will, I said. She was quiet a moment. Walter. She filed 11 days after the Tulsa World article ran. The timing is not subtle. I looked at Theo's drawing on the wall. The horse with its uphill letters. The animal that was maybe a dog, but which he had decided was a horse, and which he had named and drawn and hung on the wall with complete confidence. No, I said, it isn't. Danny was in the kitchen doorway when I set the phone down. He'd heard enough. She came back for the money, he said. Not bitter. Just the plain shape of it stated plainly. That's what the timing says, I said. He looked at me steadily. And the kids, if she wins. She won't win, I said. Not with blind certainty, but the grounded certainty of someone who has looked at the facts clearly. 9 months. No contact. The concealed policy. Margaret Foley. Judge Patricia Owens. Renata had come back for what she thought she was owed. What she hadn't accounted for was everything that had been built while she was gone. The hearing date came through at the end of the week, March 14th. Margaret was on the courthouse steps when Danny and I arrived, briefcase in hand, 2 legal pads tucked under her arm. How are you feeling? She asked. Ready, I said. Good. Jeffrey Strand, Renata's attorney, will frame her departure as a mental health crisis. Don't react to it. Let me. She looked at me directly. Judge Owens has read every document we submitted. Trust the preparation. I did. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, 6 rows of gallery benches, fluorescent light that made everything look faintly clinical. Renata was already at the petitioner's table beside a trim man in a dark suit. She looked at me once when I entered. Then she looked at the front of the room and did not look back. Judge Patricia Owens entered at 9 sharp. Silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, reading glasses used like a precision instrument. She opened the file in front of her and looked at both tables. Custody modification, hearing Cruz guardianship. Mr. Strand, you're first. Jeffrey Strand was smooth and practiced. He wrapped Renata's departure in the language of grief and recovery, the devastating psychological impact of sudden spousal loss, her documented struggles, her genuine rehabilitation. He was, as Margaret had said, competent. Margaret's opening took 4 minutes. She used dates and documented facts. May 17, 2023, Donovan Cruz died. May 19th, Renata departed, leaving 3 children aged 8, 6, and 4 with their 70-year-old grandfather. 273 days of zero contact, zero financial contribution. A life insurance policy worth $180,000, naming all 3 children as beneficiaries not disclosed to their guardian for 9 months. A custody petition filed 11 days after the Tulsa World connected that policy to active legal proceedings. She delivered it in the tone of someone reading a weather report. The courtroom went very quiet. Ms. Dunbar testified first for our side. 25 years in the Turley District school system had given her an unhurried authority the room immediately recognized. She described the children's adjustment since October, the initial difficulty, the gradual stabilization, Walter's consistent presence at the center of both. In 25 years, she said, I have not often seen a guardian step into a role of this magnitude with this degree of care. Those children know they are held. Dr. Paulette Simmons followed 15 years of pediatric practice, calm and precise. She testified to Theo's respiratory recovery, Ren's stable wellness markers, Sawyer's consistent presentation as a child in an adequately supervised home. She noted that no representative of Renata Cruz had contacted her practice in 9 months. Jeffrey Strand's cross-examinations were brief. He established that neither witness had known Renata personally and could not speak to her current fitness. Both agreed pleasantly and added nothing beyond what they'd been asked. Renata testified for 30 minutes. Strand walked her through the grief, the breakdown, the therapy begun in August, the gradual rebuilding. She spoke about the children with a specificity that felt coached details she could only know from research, not from being present. Margaret's cross-examination was short. Mrs. Cruz, you became aware of the Continental Mutual policy approximately 3 weeks after your husband's death. Correct? Yes. And you did not disclose that policy to Walter Cruz at any point in the following 9 months. I was not in a position to. Yes or no, please. A pause. No, I did not. $180,000 naming your 3 stepchildren as equal beneficiaries. Margaret let it sit. Did you make any claim on that policy during those 9 months? Renata's jaw tightened. I consulted an attorney about my options as named trustee. Did you make any claim? No, she said. I did not. Margaret returned to her seat without another word. Judge Owens took 20 minutes. She came back to the bench, opened her notes, and read without looking at either table. The court's obligation is to determine what arrangement serves the best interest of the children. Oklahoma Title 10. A provides the relevant factors, emotional ties, each party's capacity to provide for the children's needs, stability of the home environment, moral fitness of each party. She looked up. The petitioner's 9-month absence, her failure to make any financial contribution, her non-disclosure of a substantial insurance policy to which the children are entitled, and the timing of her petition, filed 11 days after public reporting, connected that policy to active legal proceedings are factors this court cannot set aside in its best interest analysis. She removed her reading glasses. The petition for custody modification is denied. The emergency guardianship order in favor of Walter Cruz is converted to a permanent guardianship order under Oklahoma Title 10A. The named trustee status of Renata Cruz on Policy 774-DRC-2201 is referred to civil court for potential removal. Court is adjourned. She stood and left. I sat at the respondent's table while the room emptied. Danny put his hand on my shoulder. Said nothing. That was exactly right. Across the room, Renata stared at the floor. Whatever she'd carried in had gone somewhere else. I looked away. I hadn't come here to watch that. I had come for Sawyer and Wren and Theo, and what I was taking out of this room was a permanent guardianship order. That was enough. Outside, the March afternoon had turned warm in the way Oklahoma manages between winter and spring, sudden and generous like an apology for February. I stood on the courthouse steps with my face tilted toward the sun while Danny waited beside me. My phone buzzed. Conrad Bellamy. 4 words. Insurance settlement came through. I showed it to Danny. He exhaled long and slow, a full-body release of something carried too long. Which one? He asked. Don't know yet, I said, but something moved. He nodded. Behind us, through this open courthouse door, Margaret's voice carried into the warm March air, sharp and clear, ending a call with 3 words. Tell them we're listening. The Continental Mutual settlement arrived the Monday after the courthouse steps. It came in 2 parts. The first, emergency living expenses, landed in my checking account. With the unreality of money fought for so long, you've half stopped believing it will arrive. It covered 3 months of rent, replaced the children's clothing properly, and allowed a grocery run where I didn't calculate each item against the remaining balance before putting it in the cart. Theo came with me that Saturday. He stood in the cereal aisle for 4 full minutes, examining options, then chose a box with a cartoon bear that cost $3 more than the store brand. I put it in the cart without comment. He looked at me with the suspicion of a child who has learned that things he wants usually require negotiation. There was no counteroffer. He hugged the cereal box the entire way to checkout. The second part, the structural claim for Turley Road, came 10 days later. Full replacement value. Combined with the preliminary settlement from Preston's wrongful death case, which his attorneys had moved toward rather than face full discovery, we had enough. Not lavishly, but enough to do what I'd been thinking about since the day Danny had mentioned Donovan's land deed in the fireproof box. The lot on Sycamore Ridge Road in Broken Arrow, just under 1/3 of an acre. Paid for. Owned outright. Donovan's. I could build there. Virgil Monroe made 1 phone call. He called the men's group at St. Augustine on a Wednesday evening and described the situation without decoration. Walter Cruz had lost his home, raised 3 children through winter, in a 2-bedroom apartment, 1 custody in court, and now had a lot in Broken Arrow and no construction crew. By Thursday morning, 16 men had called back. Father Ambrose organized a meals rotation breakfast, delivered to the Sycamore Ridge lot, every Saturday lunch provided by rotating parish families. Gerald Ashworth called his former real estate contacts and secured donated lumber from a supplier with end-of-quarter inventory to move. Danny drew the plans himself at the North Peoria kitchen table, graph paper, mechanical pencil, clean 3-bedroom layout, with a covered porch and 1 shared bathroom the children wouldn't have to fight over. Conrad Bellamy showed up the first Saturday with his own tools and a truck loaded with donated fixtures, a used stove with 4 working burners, a bathroom vanity still in its box cabinet doors that nearly matched. I stood at the edge of the Sycamore Ridge lot that morning, watching men work with the focused energy of people who understand that what they're building matters beyond the materials. The April air smelled of fresh-cut lumber and church auxiliary coffee. Theo stood beside me with hot chocolate in both hands, examining the activity with his inspector's thoroughness. "How long will it take?" he asked. "A few months," I said. "Will my room be just mine?" "Just yours," I said. He nodded, satisfied, then marched directly toward Danny, with the purposeful stride of a child who has decided he has an important contribution to make. Danny crouched to his level, listened with complete seriousness, handed him a spare measuring tape, and pointed at something. Theo spent the next hour measuring everything within reach and reporting his findings to anyone who held still long enough. Ren brought a drawing on the third Saturday. She'd worked on it all week in secret, rolling it up in her backpack. She unrolled it at the construction site and held it out to me with both hands. A house, 3 bedrooms, labeled with each child's name, a covered porch with a rocking chair occupied by a figure labeled Grandpa, a garden along the front, with flowers identified in careful capital letters, sunflowers, roses, 1 tree. "This is what it's going to look like," she announced. "When it's done." I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. I kept it there for the rest of the day. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road was structurally complete by end of May. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a kitchen with 4 working burners, a covered porch. Oak floors donated through Gerald Ashworth's contacts. Walls painted in colors Wren had selected with decisive authority: pale yellow for the kitchen, soft blue-gray for the living room, spring canopy green for her bedroom. Theo wanted white so he could see everything clearly. Sawyer chose what Danny called dusk blue, the color of sky in the minutes before dark fully arrives. We moved in on the first Saturday of June. The children carried their own boxes from Danny's truck, which was not necessary given the size of the boxes, but which they had insisted upon with a unified determination not worth arguing against. Theo dropped his on the porch steps and accepted help graciously. Wren carried hers sideways up the steps with her chin resting on top. Sawyer walked straight in down the hall into the dusk blue bedroom without stopping. I stood on the covered porch after the last box was inside and looked at the front yard. The young red oak we'd planted along the walk was thin still, years away from giving real shade, but it had already put out its first spring leaves. I thought about Wren's drawing in my jacket pocket. Danny had built the rocking chair from oak scraps and left it on the porch without saying anything about it. I sat down in it for the first time and felt it take my weight, solidly built, right, built to last. My phone buzzed on the railing. Warren Hartwell, Cecily's husband, the man who had stood in his hallway in gray pajama pants 8 months ago and told me they didn't have the space. I looked at his name on the screen. Then I picked up. "Warren," I said. His voice was different from the last time, the professional authority still present, but something underneath it shifted. Something that sounded unexpectedly like discomfort. "Walter, I need to talk to you. Not about anything legal." A pause. "Something personal." I looked at the red oak in the front yard, its new leaves bright against the June sky. "I'm listening," I said. Warren Hartwell was not a man who called people to apologize. I understood that within the first 30 seconds, not because he was cold, but because the way he structured his sentences told me he had prepared for this call and still hadn't entirely decided what shape he wanted it to take. He spoke in the careful, clause-heavy way of an attorney who has learned that precision matters more than warmth, and who is now in a situation where warmth is required and precision feels insufficient. "I want to start with October," he said. "When you came to the apartment, I handled that badly. I sat in the rocking chair on the Sycamore Ridge porch and listened. I told Cecily we didn't have the space. Technically accurate. But it wasn't the point, and I knew it wasn't the point, and I said it anyway because it was easier." A pause. "I've thought about that night more than I expected to." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "Genuinely, in the cautious way you appreciate something that arrives 8 months late." "That's not the only reason I'm calling," he said. Something shifted on his end, a chair, or the sound of a man choosing his next words carefully. "Cecily and I are separating," he said. "I filed the divorce petition 3 weeks ago. I wanted you to hear it from me, I looked at the red oak in the front yard. Its leaves moved in the June breeze with the easy motion of something unaware of what was being said on the porch behind it. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant it not for Warren particularly, but for Cecily, in the complicated way you feel sorry for someone who caused you harm when the harm comes back around to find them. "There are financial complications," Warren said, with the flatness of an attorney describing someone else's case. Cecily made certain representations during our prenuptial negotiations about her personal finances. Those representations turned out to be incomplete. Some assets she disclosed as hers were entangled with Preston's corporate structure shell company holdings she had a minority ownership stake in. She did not disclose that to me or to our attorneys. I was quiet for a moment. "She had a stake in Preston's companies," I said, "a minority position, inherited through a family trust Preston set up 3 years ago. She may not have fully understood the implications." Another pause. "Or she may have understood them entirely. I've stopped trying to determine which." I thought about the hallway in October. The warmth in Cecily's face that had been genuine, I hadn't imagined it folding under Warren's pressure within minutes. I thought about the wordless exchange between them, that fast private conversation couples carry on without opening their mouths. And I thought about what it meant that Cecily might have known on some level she hadn't examined too closely why Preston had been so quick to manage the situation at the gate. "Warren," I said, "why are you telling me this?" He took a breath. "Because the divorce discovery process will surface information about Preston's corporate structure that your attorney may find useful. My attorney has already contacted Margaret Foley's office. I wanted you to hear from me directly that I'm not obstructing that process." I understood then. Warren had found himself carrying information he hadn't known he was holding. And when he'd found out, he'd done what any good attorney does, moved it toward where it could do something. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not looking for credit," he said immediately. "I'm looking to have handled at least one part of this correctly." We were quiet for a moment. From inside the house, Theo's voice drifted out bright and declarative, explaining to someone exactly where his horse drawing was going on his white bedroom wall. "How are they?" Warren asked, quietly, unexpectedly. "The children?" "Yes." I looked through the screen door at the hallway beyond the pale yellow kitchen at the end, Wren's green bedroom door half open, Sawyer's composition notebook on the hall table, where he'd set it when he carried his box in. "They're good," I said. "They're home." He was quiet a moment. When he spoke again, something had gotten through the precision to a softer register underneath. "I'm glad," he said. "Tell them I hope they like the new house." "I will," I said. He ended the call. Danny came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and settled on the porch step beside the rocking chair. He handed me a glass and waited. "Warren and Cecily are divorcing," I said. "Cecily had a minority stake in Preston's Shell LLCs through a family trust. Warren's attorney has already called Margaret." Danny turned his glass slowly. "Cecily had money in Preston's companies." "Yes." He was quiet. The ice shifted in his glass. "She stood in that hallway," he said, "and told you there wasn't space." "She did," I said. He took a long drink of iced tea and looked at the red oak. "Walter, you came here with nothing but that garbage bag. Now you're sitting on your own porch." He set his glass on the step. "Whatever Cecily knew, it didn't stop you. It just made the road longer." He was right. Margaret called that evening to confirm Warren's information and announced she was revising the settlement terms upward based on the new LLC documentation. "What are the revised terms?" I asked. She told me. I set the phone on the railing and looked at the yard for a long moment. Then I picked it up. "Tell them we accept nothing less," I said. "That's exactly what I intended to say," she said. The school called on a Friday morning in late June. Ms. Dunbar's voice warm, slightly formal, the tone teachers use when calling about something they're pleased about. "Mr. Cruz, Sawyer has submitted his oral presentation topic for the end-of-year showcase. He's calling it home, and he's specifically asked that you attend, last Friday of the school year." I pulled Wren's drawing from my jacket pocket, the house with the rocking chair, and the one tree softened at the fold lines from weeks of being carried. "Tell him," I said, "that I will be there." I didn't know what Sawyer had written in that composition notebook, across all those construction Saturdays. I didn't know what he'd made of everything he'd watched and measured and written down in his careful, upright handwriting over 8 months. But I knew it was going to cost me something. The good kind of something. The auditorium at Turley Elementary smelled of floor wax and the particular warmth of a building that has held children all year and is nearly ready to release them into summer. I arrived 20 minutes early. Danny was beside me in a pressed button-down shirt. Virgil Monroe sat 2 rows behind us. He'd called Wednesday to ask if he could come, and I'd said, of course. Father Ambrose was at the end of our row already with his program booklet open, already finding Sawyer's name in the listing. Ms. Dunbar had saved us 4 seats in the 3rd row. Wren sat between Danny and me, feet not quite reaching the floor, yellow dress program booklet rolled into a cylinder in both hands. Theo was on my other side, pressed against my arm, wearing his good shoes, which he had already untied and retied incorrectly twice. He leaned up and whispered in what he believed was a whisper. "Is Sawyer nervous?" "Probably a little," I said. "I would be very nervous," Theo said. "I would probably fall down." "You'd be fine," I said. He considered this. "Maybe, but I'd probably still fall down a little." There were 11 presentations. Sawyer was 9th. When Ms. Dunbar announced his name, I felt Wren go still beside me. He walked out from the left wing of the stage in dark pants and a blue shirt, the color of his bedroom walls, hair pressed flat, the way he'd done himself that morning without being asked. He set his composition notebook on the podium. Then he looked out at the auditorium. He found me in the 3rd row immediately. I don't know how the stage lights angled toward him, and the audience sat in relative dimness, but he found me the way children find the specific face they're looking for, with the unerring accuracy of someone who has calibrated their internal compass to a particular north. He looked at me for 1 full second. Then he looked at his notebook, took 1 breath, and began. "My project is called Home," he said. "I started working on it in November when we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment on North Peoria Avenue with 1 working burner on the stove and a radiator that knocked every 20 minutes. A small ripple of quiet laughter moved through the auditorium. Sawyer did not smile. He was not performing. He was reporting. "I used to think home was a place," he said. "A specific address. When the house burned down last October, I thought home was just gone, that we didn't have one anymore." He turned a page. "I interviewed 7 people for this project. My grandpa, my great-uncle Danny, our neighbor Virgil Monroe, Father Ambrose from St. Augustine Church, my teacher Ms. Dunbar, a man named Conrad Bellamy who was my father's business partner, and Mr. Gerald Ashworth, who has been our neighbor for 30 years. He looked up briefly, finding each person he'd named in the audience before returning to his notebook. I asked all 7 of them the same question. "What makes something a home?" He paused, not for effect, but reading carefully, wanting to get it right. Virgil Monroe said home is where somebody knows your name and is glad you came back. Father Ambrose said home is the place where you are received without having to earn it. Ms. Dunbar said home is wherever the people are who show up when they don't have to. Mr. Ashworth said home is a decision, not an address you decide to make it, and then you build it. He turned another page. My great-uncle Danny said home is wherever your people are. It moves with them. Something moved across his face, quick, controlled the discipline of a 9-year-old who has decided he is going to get through this, and then it passed. And my grandpa said home is the place where someone is waiting for you to come back. Even if that place is just a car with the heat on, or a church with the lights still burning. If someone there is waiting for you, that's home. The auditorium was completely quiet. Not polite quiet. The actual quiet of people who have stopped thinking about anything else. I used to think we lost our home when the fire came, he said. But I was wrong about what home was, so I was wrong about losing it. We didn't lose our home. We carried it with us. Grandpa carried it the whole time. He looked up from the notebook. Home isn't the building. Home is the person who holds the door open. He closed the composition notebook. He looked at me. I had not cried properly since the night of the fire. I had turned on bathroom faucets and pressed my face into towels and let some of it out in controlled increments, enough to keep functioning, not enough to let the full weight move through me. There had always been something the next morning that needed me functional. But sitting in the third row watching my 9-year-old grandson close his notebook and look at me from a stage I ran out of whatever composure runs on, it came quietly. No sob, nothing dramatic, just a sudden and complete inability to keep the thing contained. My jaw tightened first, then my throat, then my eyes stopped cooperating. Danny put his hand on my shoulder and said nothing. Exactly right. Ren looked up at me. She had never seen me cry, not once, and reached up and took my hand in both of hers and held it the way small children hold things they are determined not to let go of. Theo climbed onto my knee without asking, arms around my neck. "It's okay, Grandpa," he said quietly. "You can cry. It just means it mattered." Sawyer found us in the hallway afterward. When he reached me, he looked up at my face and said, "Was it okay?" I crouched down to his level. "It was more than okay," I said. "Sawyer, it was the best thing I have ever heard." Something moved across his face, not the controlled composure of the stage, but something younger and softer, entirely his own. His eyes went bright, and his mouth pulled at the corners, and for just a moment he looked exactly like Donovan at 9 years old. I pulled him into me and held him, and he held back, and Ren grabbed his arm from the side, and Theo announced loudly that he hadn't fallen down even once. I held my grandson in that school hallway, and for the first time in 8 months, the weight that had been pressing down on the top of my head lifted just enough, and what came in to fill the space felt for the first time like it might last. We drove home to Sycamore Ridge Road in the late afternoon light. Theo fell asleep against Ren's shoulder before we left the parking lot. Sawyer sat in front composition notebook on his knee watching the summer evening go by. We turned onto Sycamore Ridge Road, and the house came into view, covered porch, yellow kitchen window, young red oak by the front walk. Ren said softly, "There it is." "There it is," I agreed. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine, and that was when I saw the car parked at the curb. 2 people standing beside it that I recognized, Preston and Cecily, standing on the sidewalk in front of the house on Sycamore Ridge Road, looking at the porch, looking at the oak tree, looking at the lit kitchen window. And then as I got out of the car looking at me, they had not called ahead. Preston was 42 years old, and he looked it in a way he hadn't at Donovan's funeral. The managed composure he usually maintained had lost its structural integrity. Plain shirt, no jacket, the particular tiredness of a man carrying something he hasn't yet put down. Cecily stood 1 step behind him, which told me whose idea this visit had been and whose it had not. Danny appeared on the porch with a dish towel in his hand. He took in the sidewalk in one sweep and stayed where he was. Preston looked at me. "Walter, I wanted to come in person." "All right," I said. "You're here." "Margaret's office reached a settlement agreement with my attorneys last week," he said. "You know the terms." "I know the terms," I said. "The wrongful death claim resolved. The insurance interference suit resolved. The combined settlement revised upward after Warren's disclosure about Cecily's minority LLC stake was structured into a trust for the 3 children managed by an independent trustee appointed by Judge Owens, accessible at 25. The way Donovan had written that he needed it to be. Preston had signed without going to trial. Cruz Capital Properties had not survived the process intact. The Shell LLC network had been unwound, 2 leveraged projects sold at loss. What remained was smaller and more honestly proportioned than what had preceded it. I did not feel satisfaction about that. What I felt was something flatter and more complete. Something without a particular name. Cecily stepped forward. "Daddy," she said. I had not heard it from her in 8 months. Her eyes were wet, genuinely not performed. "I'm not here because I think an apology fixes October. I needed you to see me say it. I'm sorry. For the hallway. For all of it. I hear you, Cecily, I said. Not I forgive you, not we're fine. I hear you, which was the truth, and which she received with a small nod. Preston looked at the house. The covered porch, the yellow kitchen window, the young red oak, the front door with its clean paint. You built this, he said. People helped, I said. A lot of people. He looked at Danny, at the children behind me, at Sawyer last, who looked back with the direct, unafraid gaze of someone who knows exactly who he is and what he stands on. Preston looked away first. I went inside and came back with the black garbage bag, clean folded, kept in the hall closet since we'd moved in. I held it out to Preston, the night the house burned. I said, a 72-year-old man came out in the rain and gave me blankets. He didn't ask if there was space. He didn't calculate the cost. He just gave what he had. I set it carefully in Preston's hands. So you remember what that looks like. He looked down at the bag. When he looked up, something in his face had shifted, not broken, but altered. You don't have to say anything tonight, I said. Go home and think about it. He nodded. Cecily touched my arm as they turned briefly light. I let it land. I watched their car disappear around the corner. Danny handed me iced tea. Wren slipped her hand into mine. Theo announced dinner was getting cold. Sawyer looked down the empty road, then turned back to the house. Grandpa, are we done now with the hard part? I looked at my grandson. 9 years old. 13 months behind us. The hardest part, I said. Yes. He went inside. The screen door shut with a clean, solid sound. I sat in the rocking chair. The red oak stood thin in the front yard, years away from giving real shade, already putting out its spring leaves. I picked up my iced tea, and I let the evening come. If you stayed with me until now, you already know this is not just another grandpa story about a man who lost a house. This is a family story about what happens when the people who were supposed to show up don't. And you have to decide in the middle of a rainstorm, with 3 children behind you, whether that breaks you or builds you. I believe God never leaves a person standing alone in the storm. He just sends help in ways you don't expect. Here is what 13 months taught me. 13 months that began the morning I got that call about Donovan and ended on a porch in Broken Arrow with iced tea in my hand. Don't wait to be rescued. But don't refuse a hand when someone offers one. And the most honest thing I can tell you, don't be like Preston. Don't be like Cecily. Don't be the person who looks back after the storm and realizes they were standing on the wrong side of the door. Regret that arrives too late always weighs more than help that arrives on time. That is my grandpa's story. But I know there are family stories just like this one out there. Maybe yours, maybe someone you love. If something here reached you, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs it today. And if you want more grandpa stories like this one, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. The stories on this channel are works of fiction, built for inspiration and reflection. If this content isn't right for you, feel free to step away and find what serves you better. Knowing what you need is never wrong.